The talk you are about to hear is by Sensei Richard von Sturmer. For our Teisho this evening, the 3rd of September, we're going to look at one of our Dharma ancestors, Daiun, Sogaku, Harada, Roshi. One's going to pass a photograph of Harada Roshi round. So just take a look and just pass it to the next person. Daiun Sogaku Harada Roshi was born in Obama on the 13th of October, 1871. He was ordained as a Soto priest at the age of 7 and died on the 12th of December in 1961. And looking at this photo of him in his later years, in his 80s, it's like we're looking at another era. He was Roshi Keplo's first teacher, and really after Roshi Keplo passed away, we lost that direct link with Japan. He received Dharma transmission within the Soto school from Harada Sodo Kakusho. And that's one of the names we chant in our ancestor line, Kakusho Sodo Honored One. But in his 20s, he studied with the Rinzai master, Dokutan Roshi, and we'll come back to that. He taught at Komazawa University for 12 years before assuming full-time responsibilities as abbot of Hoshinji, where he served for 40 years. As I said, he was Roshi Keplo's first teacher, and so he's our great-grandfather in the Dharma. Roshi Keplo's our grandfather. And when Philip Keplo met him in 1953, he was in his early 80s. And many Western lineages acknowledge Harada Roshi as their root teacher, and the style of Zen we practice at the Auckland Zen Center comes directly from innovations he made in Zen practice. It's said that Harada Roshi took the best of both the Rinzai and the Soto schools of Zen. And he's very well known for revitalizing the Koan curriculum and also for introducing Zen workshops for lay people, which was very unusual at the time. Usually if you wanted to attend a Zen temple, you often had to wait a day on the footsteps of the temple, or more than a day, maybe 3 days, begging to be let in. And finally, if you persisted, they'd let you in to a temple. But after the war, he saw that a lot of lay people really wanted to begin practicing Zen. So he began giving introductory workshops, which Yasutani Roshi modified, and we've inherited. So every 2 months we give introductory workshops here. But I learned also that as a Soto practitioner from the Soto school, we sit facing the wall, and Rinzai Zen students sit facing outward. But he modified kinhin to the kinhin that we do now, which is sort of like a slightly fast-paced walking. In Soto, for Kinhin, some of you may know, they go very slowly, one step at a time. And Rinzai go quite fast, faster than normal walking. So he went the middle way as far as Kinhin goes. So when Philip Kapleau came back to Japan after being a court reporter at the Nuremberg trials and at the Tokyo trials, in his own words, he had quite a soft landing when he came to Japan in 1953, in that he began studying at Ryutakuji Monastery, Hakuin's monastery, with a wonderful teacher, Soen Nakagawa Roshi. And so it's been slightly confusing for me. We say that Harada Roshi was Philip Kapleau's first teacher, and really Soen Nakagawa Roshi was his mentor. He was the first Zen teacher he met. And Soen Nakagawa Roshi, on their days off, took him to Tokyo, and Soen Nakagawa knew quite a few writers, kabuki actors, musicians, and Philip Kapleau got to meet all these different, really interesting Japanese people, as well as doing Zazen at Ryutakuji, which means dragon swamp. But Soen told him that, I'm not your teacher. He saw something in Philip Kapleau, some real ardor. He really wanted to practice Zen. And Soen Nakagawa Roshi thought that it was best that he goes to a very well-known, highly respected training monastery, which was Hoshinji, where Harada, Daiun Harada was Roshi. And so one day he called Philip Kapleau into his quarters, and there on the mantelpiece was a letter, and he said, I wrote to Daiun Sogaku Harada Roshi suggesting that you could come and train with him. And here's the letter. And he says, yes, why doesn't Philip Kapleau come to Sesshin? Sesshin is starting soon. Do you want to go? And Philip Kapleau said, oh, of course, why not? And so he went to Hoshinji. Little did he know what Sesshin entailed. It was the harshest Sesshins in Japan. But that's another story. So he was introduced to Harada Roshi. Their first meeting in the abbot's quarters, Harada Roshi was in his long johns and he was doing calisthenics, stretches. And when he finished, he came up to Philip Kapleau and did something very unusual. He held out his hand to shake Philip Kapleau's hand. And that was very unusual for a person of his generation, to actually shake someone's hand. Usually you'd bow. And he sort of beamed and smiled and said in Japanese, welcome to Hoshinji. So what I'd like to do is to read an autobiographic account that he wrote towards the end of his life. It goes like this. My life in Zen temples is a long, continuing story. To calculate the years, I was first taken into a temple when I was 7 years old. I'm now 86. Last fall in Tokyo, I saw an authority in the field of phrenology, that's reading the bumps on your skull, who said that I would be fine until age 90. So it does not appear that my time is up yet. Above all, I believe that my living so long is a fruit of my doing Zazen. And it's true. and that Zazen is good for your health. It's one of the byproducts. I was a rather weak child to begin with, and on top of that, very little attention was paid to nutrition in Zen temples of old. The usual fare consisted of boiled barley and rice with radishes and miso soup with greens and occasionally tofu. I have to say that when Philip Kapleau started at Oshinji, that was basically their diet. In the early 50s, after World War II, it was very poor in Japan. So even when Philip Kapleau started, food wasn't great. It wasn't very nutritious. Harada goes on. As a result of this diet, from childhood through youth, the skin over my whole body was dry, and in cold weather, I was plagued by chapped, cracking skin. During my years in the training hall, the annual December rounds of begging, takuhatsu, for radishes was a trying time. These would actually be daikon, these long white vegetables we call radishes. We collected the daikon from outlying villages and by twos carried the heavy loads back to the temple on our shoulders. The ruptures on the soles of my feet would bleed so that I had to proceed on tiptoes. Upon returning to the temple, all the monks would bathe to warm up before sleeping. But with my feet burning so painfully, I could not go into the bath. This kind of thing, however, does not really fall into the category of tales of hardship for a Zen monk. For a Zen monk, the greatest pain lies in bringing to light the great matter. That's the great matter of birth and death. He continues, I heard something very strange on the radio the other night. It was from a young man participating in one of those quiz shows that are so popular these days. This young man gave his profession as Buddhist priest. At this, the moderator commentated that the training must be very difficult, to which the young man calmly replied, No, I don't do any training. The moderator was reduced to mute amazement. This particular priest happened to come from another sect, but I just want to say that these days the Zen priesthood as well abounds with such types. Actually, we might even say they form the majority. In this age of housing problems, priests live in spacious temples built for them by our ancestors, and all they have to do is read a few sutras, perform funerals, and keep up graveyards. Furthermore, even the universities, which are supposed to be training religious persons, are not requiring the students to practice. As a result, the number of monks in training halls like mine is ever decreasing. On the other hand, the number of lay aspirants is, oddly enough, on the increase. As I mentioned that time, more lay people wanting to practice Zazen. And it's true today about Zen temples. Many Zen temples, they don't even sit in Zazen. And they may have, some temples may have maybe a monthly Zazen Kai, a day of Zazen. But apart from that, many of the zendos are empty. He goes on, not only ordained priests, but young people in general, if they are serious, are seeking the truth and are troubled with doubts and questions about life. They begin to ponder questions like, Why are we born? In what ways should we live? What happens after death? I too was troubled by such questions in my youth, and at the heart of that distress was the question of birth and death. I mercilessly agonized over this until I could stand it no longer. Finally, I sat down and wrote long letters to 3 Buddhist leaders of the day: Dr. Murakami, a foremost Buddhist scholar, Shaku Soen Zenji, a great Zen master, and Unsho Rishi, a Shingon sect master, highly honored for his eminent virtue. I asked for a rock-bottom answer to the question of life and death. This must have been when he was in his teenager, late teens. He asked, when a human being dies, does he vanish like clouds and mist, or is there a life after death? Each of these gentlemen quickly responded to the rough-mannered questions of this young, obscure monk from the hinterlands, and I still feel thankful for that today. To begin, from Dr. Murakami came the dubious reply: Buddhism teaches that there is no permanent self. If there is no permanent self, there should be no birth and death. However, perhaps there is life and death for those who recognize in themselves an ego. So that didn't impress the young Harada. A severe scolding came from Unsho Rishi. Can a disciple of the Buddha be questioning such a thing? Is it not clearly stated that there in the teaching, whether you look at the doctrinal aspect or any of the sutras? But if you still do not understand, come to my hall for training. And he didn't come to the hall for training. And then from the Zen teacher, Shaku Soen Roshi, came the instruction: what? A Buddhist who does not know about the continuity of life? If you experience Kensho, an awakening, you can clear up that little problem before you sit down to breakfast. You can clear up that little problem before you sit down to breakfast. If you clearly resolved a breakthrough koan, such as mu, your problem will be promptly settled. Shaku Soen's reply was the most edifying of the 3. I firmly resolved that I would have to undergo earnest training and come to enlightenment. So it was that I went for training to the Zen monastery, Sogenji, and I was able to hear the sound of one hand clapping. That is to say, that upon attaining Kensho, I really had deep peace of mind for the first time. The sound of one hand clapping, like mu, is a breakthrough koan, a first koan. This is the sound of 2 hands, but what is the sound of one hand clapping? He continues, as anyone who has had the experience knows, a very special joy accompanies the first Kensho, and in that joy I went off and danced a little jig. But after a month or 2, even that experience became doubtful, and I plunged into a deeper anguish than ever. Once again, I threw myself into practice. Memories come back from this period of sitting in the snow and doing zazen, or stark naked in a bamboo grove swarming with mosquitoes. My second Kensho experience may sound a little distasteful. One morning, while I was on a long begging trip, an old woman happened to urinate in the toilet beside a farmhouse gate. As I passed, When I saw the frothing urine, I had a great awakening. So anything, if one is concentrated enough, absorbed enough into the koan, that one completely disappears into the practice, anything can be a trigger for awakening. He goes on, after 3 years of Zen training, I entered a Buddhist university to study Buddhist theory. After graduating, I was twice appointed to conduct university research, which I carried on for 6 years. During that time, I practiced under several teachers, but none of them sufficed. Then finally, I went to study with Dokutan Roshi at Nanzenji and practiced under him for 3 years. Nanzenji is one of the great Rinzai monasteries in Kyoto. Dokutan Roshi was an outstanding training master, endowed with both the power of Buddha truth and with moral excellence. I am truly fortunate to have been able to practice under such a highly respected teacher. As I always tell those practicing under me, Dokutan Roshi trained to this extent despite a weak constitution from childhood. He always spoke very softly, but when this Roshi would scold me, in a voice one could barely catch, a cold shiver of sweat would break out of my armpits. I had been hauled roughly over the coals by other masters before and remained relatively cool. But while Dokutan's Roshi's words were similar or equal, his strength of character added force. I learned from him that strength of character alone can move people. Well, during that time, I had Kinsho 2-3 more times, and at last I worked out the problem of birth and death. Tranquil in my heart, I could fall into deep sleep with a loud snore. But to reach this point took 20 years of training. Of course, this does not mean that I graduated. I am still in practice. And while I am an old man who has lived 86 years, on the path I am just a 2-year-old child, still wet behind the ears. A most humbling state. I'm just a 2-year-old child, still wet behind the ears. So he was still, even in his 80s, he was still learning. Reminds me of Joshu saying that if he met a 5-year-old child that had something to teach, he would learn from that 5-year-old child. Harada Roshi continues. When the age of 40 came round, it looked as though I had no alternative but to accept a teaching post at the university I had been attending. I taught at Komazawa University for 12 years until I realized that it was far more important to train Zen monks than to follow the teaching profession. So I started Hoshinji Monastery and have been there ever since. That makes 36 or 7 years up to now. As it now stands, I'm a feeble old man who is long past his proposed age of retirement, still trying to throw my weight around. I think, still trying to throw my weight around. I think Harada Roshi was about 5 foot tall. So he didn't have that weight to throw around, although his strength of character was immense. So I'm still trying to throw my weight around, at least in an effort to help open the eyes of those Americans who have come all the way over here to practice. I am most enthusiastic to see a correct transmission of Zen come across the water. Mr. Kaplow, who is at my training hall, was here some years ago as a court reporter for the Tokyo trials. Now, just like monks, he dines on rice gruel, hauls buckets of night soil, and practices both zazen and meditation in action. While grappling with the koan mu, he attends the week-long sesshin, which are held 6 times a year, keeping vigil through the night, mu, mu, mu. While all of this efforts are truly laudable, unfortunately, he has not yet had kensho. And in fact, after 3 years of training at a Shinji, Philip Kaplow worked with one of Harada Roshi's Dharma, also another great-grandfather of ours in the Dharma, Yasutani Roshi, and he got kensho under Yasutani Roshi. Before concluding, I want to mention a few more words regarding the Americans in practice. There are 4 here, including 1 woman, but 3 have returned to their native country, leaving only Mr. Kaplow. So we can feel really grateful to Roshi Kaplow that he stuck it out in this very, very strict regime at Hoshinji. All 4 were, for the most part, prompted to begin Zazen practice as a result of hearing lectures by Dr. Daisetsu Suzuki at Columbia University. That is to say, they know that the marrow of Zen definitely cannot be reached through concepts or through faith. As Dr. Suzuki told them, in order to experience spiritual self-knowledge, it is necessary to undergo formal training under a true master. These Americans who are coming here to practice are truly precious for the sake of the great Dharma. On their behalf, I will take extra good care of this body and pray that I may live to an even riper old age. And he did. He lived to just over 90. So remember, the phrenologist was right. He died in 1961 at the age of 90. Or in Japanese calculation, because they start your years at conception, he was 91, but 90 in Western terms. Now, few issues to address. First is the question of Harada Roshi's Dharma transmission, which is very unusual. Harada Roshi completed working through the Koan curriculum with the Rinzai master Dokutan Roshi. This is very unusual for a Soto teacher, really unheard of, to go and work with the Rinzai teacher on koans. In the Soto school at that time, and for over a century, shikantaza, just sitting, was the main practice. There was no koan work. Our contemporary Zen teacher, American teacher, Dosho Port, comments, it is unclear whether Harada Roshi received Inka Shomei Dharma transmission from Dokutan Roshi. And again he says, for Rinzai master to fully authorize a Soto monk is most unusual and remains controversial to this day. So there's some controversy about, did Harada Roshi get Dharma transmission from Dokutan Roshi? One teacher says no, he didn't. However, Yasutani Roshi, who was one of Harada Roshi's 14 Dharma heirs, wrote that Harada Roshi told him, "When I received Inca from Dokutan Roshi, he said to me, 'The Soto sect is a large religious denomination. If you say that it has no true teachers and that you went and got Dharma transmission from a Rinzai master, it would affect the Soto sect's reputation. So keep this secret and say that you got Dharma transmission from an appropriate person within the Soto sect.'" I was truly grateful for these words, and so I would not indiscreetly divulge the fact that I was given transmission from Dokutan Roshi. And so from Dokutan Roshi, and then revised somewhat, the koan curriculum that we have here, that we've inherited, comes from Harada Roshi and Yasutani Roshi. Now there is a shadow side to, if you like, to Harada Roshi that we need to address. He came from a samurai background, and as a young man had a great temper, and he told fellow Kaplo that if he hadn't come to Zen, he would have probably killed someone. That's how fiery his temper was. He said that also, that after his first Kensho, it took him 10 years of sustained practice to uproot the remnants of his anger. That's how deep it went. So that said, he was a fervent supporter of Japanese nationalism during the Second World War. And Brian Victoria in Zen at War quotes several passages from Harada Roshi's writings at that time. This is what Harada Roshi wrote, I think in his 60s, during the war or World War II or building up to it. "The spirit of Japan is the great way of the Shinto gods. It is the substance of the universe, the essence of the truth. The Japanese people are a chosen people whose mission it is to control the world." That was very much the feeling in Japan in World War II. They were going to control the world. And to begin with, China, Korea, Singapore, they looked upon other Asian races as being below the Japanese. The Japanese were the highest, and Chinese, Koreans, and other Asian races were below them. And a very famous quote, if ordered to march, tramp, tramp, or shoot, bang, bang, this is the manifestation of the highest wisdom. The unity of Zen and war, of which I speak, extends to the farthest reaches of the Holy War, which at that time was Japan's war in the Pacific. In order to march, tramp, tramp, or shoot, bang, bang. This is what Aiken Roshi calls pernicious oneness. Become totally one with your gun while taking another person's life, which of course is a violation of the precept not to kill. And it's hard for us to imagine the real fervent, all-pervasive pro-atmosphere in Japan at that time, in the time of World War II. No one could speak out against the emperor and Japanese militarism. And if you did, you would have been arrested, imprisoned, or even executed. It really permeated all aspects of society, and unfortunately, Zen temples as well. Great modern Zen teacher Tangen Roshi, Philip Kapleau's mentor at Hosunji, And he died, Tangen Roshi died several years ago. He was the abbot of Bukokuchi, where Roshi and I visited, Amala Roshi and I visited, said that he also had the view that the emperor was God and supported the military regime, hoping to die for Japan. We believed that the Americans were devils, he told us, and that saving the Mahayana was up to us. After the war, we discovered that we'd been completely duped, so we changed our views. He said that Harada Roshi's support for Western students was part of his repayment for his previous wrongdoing, and that Harada Roshi had seen from political errors in pre-war and wartime Japan. He'd seen from his political errors in pre-war and wartime Japan how much he still needed to work on himself. No doubt extending the hand to Philip Kapleau, shaking his hand when they first met, and allowing other Westerners to train at Hoshinji was part of this process. So this balancing, we have to balance. Harada Roshi at the time caught up and being a proponent of war and Japanese militarism, and then after the war, in his open acceptance of American students. There's a real shift in his attitudes, Final aspect I'd look at is Deko. In his old age, when Philip Kapleau knew him, Harada Roshi was always accompanied by his dog Deko, when he was walking around the temple grounds. He really loved his dog. But some of the monks at Hoshinji resented the love and affection that Harada Roshi gave his dog, Deko. And when he was traveling to other parts of Japan, they would mistreat him. They would mistreat the dog. And one monk in particular was rather cruel. During one sesshin, this monk had kensho, and Philip Kapleau watched him keenly afterwards to see if the monk's attitude to Deko had changed post-kensho. In those days at Hoshinji, at the end of sesshin, people who had attained kensho were paraded up the front. So everyone knew who'd had a breakthrough. So Philip Kapleau knew this guy had had kensho, an initial breakthrough. So he was looking out to see, had his attitude changed? Not at all. In his master's absence, the monk continued to kick and mistreat Deko, as he'd done before. When Aiken Roshi heard of this story, he commented that Philip Kapleau was hasty to jump to conclusions, and given time and the deepening of his insight, the monk's behaviour may well have changed. Well, we don't know. I'm not so sure. I don't agree with Aiken Roshi on that. Character in Zen is really complex. It's really complex. Not all negative character traits are performed with even a deep awakening. This monk's ingrained attitude toward dogs and towards Deko in particular may have just remained part of his character, who he was. Sometime when I work up to it, I'll give a Teisho on Zen and character, because it is such an interesting issue. Anyway, Harada Roshi is buried at Hoshinji his monastery. And if you visit his grave, if you ever get to Hoshinji, you'll find there's 3 stone grave markers. One is for Harada Roshi's Soto teacher. The middle one is Harada Roshi. And the 3rd grave marker is for Deko, his dog. So they're all together. Good dog. Finally, just to close, I'd like to read what Roshi Kapleau writes about Harada Roshi in the 3 Pillars of Zen. Harada Roshi was a rare phenomenon in the Buddhist world, a professor during the academic year and a Zen master during the summer vacation, conducting sesshin at various temples. Within a short time, he gained the reputation as a strict disciplinarian. His dissatisfaction with the narrowness of academic life and its inevitable accent on theory, coupled with the limited opportunity afforded him to train people through sesshin in the direct experience of the Dharma, was brought to a head by repeated requests that he assume abbotship of Hoshinji. He finally accepted, and for the next 40 years lived as a master of this monastery, which was known as one of the outstanding centers of Zen training in Japan. Until he was almost 90, Harada Roshi conducted a week of intensive sesshin at Hoshinji 6 times a year, in April, May, June, October, November, and December, and between held sesshin in other parts of Japan. 5 days before he drew his last breath, he toppled over in a faint, and without pain, gradually became weaker and weaker, passing from a partial coma to complete unconsciousness. The time of his death coincided exactly with low tide, and Obama is a seaport, a sea town on the Sea of Japan, where he lived. Harada Roshi had literally ebbed away with the waters. And this is his death poem. For 40 years, I've been selling water by the bank of a river. Ho, ho! My labors have been wholly without merit. We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows. All beings without number, I vow to liberate endless blind passions. I vow to uproot dark days beyond measure. I vow to penetrate the Dharma beyond measure, I The teaching you have received is offered freely. If you would like to make a donation to support the continuation of this podcast service or learn more about practice opportunities at the Auckland Zen Center, please visit www.aucklandzen.org.nz.